Welcome to the short version of Bad Actors and Hex Crawls. How did pragmatic simplification become complicated? Well, you get the motivation, right? There's a lot of weird people talking a lot of shit about Hex Crawls. That they're complicated, that you need a lot of stuff. We don't want that. And this abomination, don't even get me started. Okay, here you get it on the point. Our man Milan says that Alexandrian's take on Hex Crawls has been a disaster for the human race. Talk about overcomplicating a pure, simple, and tremendously fun game form. And he's right. Especially as the game started with two very good OG Hex Crawls. And if you look at them, you get Mark Miller, 1980. He's the first with the Double Adventure 2, two true Hex Crawls, Across the Bright Face, Mission on Mithril. The one is a chase, the one is an exploration of the planet, of another planet. And they're right? It's the most published and played traveler adventure there is. And then you got the you get the map of Mithril there, and then you get the Isle of Dread X1. Do we need to say more? Yes, we do need to say more. There's a player map that comes with it. Okay, but before that we had AD&D. Right? 6 years of AD&D that inspired both of them. AD&D obviously used the Auto Survival board game. The Auto Survival board game is kind of a war game. And this kind of a war game lets us to think, well, maybe we should take a look at hobby war games. Okay, in hobby war games, you got Napoleon at War here. Wonderful. That's a game that Gary would have played. In 1971, the first Precursor was out. So there we go. Before, not Napoleon at War, but before we had Hex and Counter War games, we basically only had the Prussian Kriegsspiel and its variants. And what you would do there, you would play on a topographic map. And this is quite complicated. You need rulers and protractors and the rule of 3 to calculate scale stuff. And Hex Crawls, Hex maps make all these things go away. How do they do it? Well, very easy. Instead of topographic map, you use a stylized map. Instead of using rulers and protractors, you use discretized space to have terrain and geography very easily chunked into nice little bits. This drastically reduces complexity, both conceptually as well as number-wise. So you get low numbers. What you do is you choose the values for turn length and hex size to produce small integer values, little numbers from 1 to 10, right? This is what you're gonna do. And this is what they did, right? So you have here one of these mythically complicated war games where you have this combat strength. Oh God, what I'm going to do with it? I got a 5. Wonderful, a 5. I can do that. And a 4 for the movement allowance. And I know it's lag movement. So I got lag movement, I got cavalry movement, I got artillery movement. No shit. Very easy, right? Very easy. And then what all the war games have, among these very easy to use and read numbers, you have got a terrain effects chart. So you know, this is the terrain. It costs that many movement points to go in there. And then I move across the board. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No big deal. And then they even have an effect on combat. Okay, to make the example more realistic, we go to the actual terrain effects chart of this very game that we are looking at right now. And this actual terrain effects chart is, here you see a clear hex costs 1 movement point, which should be the scale that you're working on. And forest hex is 2 movement point, very nice. Rough hex is 2 movement points, and so on and so on. A road hex halves the movements, it's just half a movement point if you move along the road. Also makes sense. And if I want to cross a river, I can only do this at a bridge. Or, if it's more shallow, it's just a stream, I can ford that thing for 2 additional movement points. There we have a little piece of the battlefield of, what was the Marengo? Yes, in Italy. And you've got this very powerful French infantry regiment, 9 factors of firepower, combat strength, and 4 factors of movement on the legs. And there we go. We want to go closer to Stortigiona. And here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Nice, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. And over is my turn. This is how you move on a hex map. And if I want to go into the woods, no problem. 1, 2, close up to the woods. Got 2 movement points left. Forest costs 2 movement points. And there I go. 4. Turn is over and I moved. Wonderful. And now I got some cavalry going. Haha. And they are moving along the road for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Right? 2 for the forest and 2 additional for crossing the stream. There you go. Nothing complicated, right? This is how you do it. And this is how AD&D did it. If you look at this table in more detail, I mean, you could pause the video or whatever. I send you the slides or what. You will see that these integer movement factors, the small integers, are very close to those used in wargames. And you also get explicit information that the players should have a blank hexagon map as they move over each hex, and the referee will tell them what is in the hex. Right? This is called exploration. This is a hex crawl right there. Basically, in one page, everything you need to know about hex crawls. And to compound our argument is this little paragraph that terrain costs are actually handled by what is called here terrain penalties, but it's also called costs, and the costs are just directly taken out of auto survival. Some mountains cost 3, crossing river at non-vortex cost also 3, and so on and so on. This is basically like we just showed you in the Napoleonic wargame. Then you have 2 other things, scale and turn length. So each move is 1 day, and each day is considered a turn. And the scale is 5 miles. So all these numbers are adjusted so that you have small integer, small whole numbers, movement factors, and movement costs. And then they interact wonderfully, and you can just move across the board with just doing subtraction instead of using the rule of 3 or rulers or protractors or anything of that kind. If you look at first edition, you have to keep in mind that first edition definitely is advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and it is advanced Dungeons and Dragons. It's not advanced homespacing or advanced Mensa high fructose corn syrup or advanced Moldvay basic, right? It's advanced Dungeons and Dragons, so that means advanced original Dungeons and Dragons. So in the PHP, we get a little attempt by Gary to have a one-size-fits-all solution using the inches movement to directly derive the tracking number. And if you calculate it, it's a nice little thing. It if you scale to 6 mile hexes, it also goes to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? To these movement factors, which is nice. And terrain will vary the movement rate, is everything that he tells you. And here in the DMG, he will give you the actual design kit. So this is a design kit to design your own campaign map, basically your own little outer survival map, but you're not shackled to 1 day and 5 mile hexes anymore, because this is advanced Dungeons and Dragons. So he gives you these tables, and the important part being movement rates are given, and you can adapt them to the scale of your campaign maps accordingly, right? So you adapt them so that they fit to your 6 mile hexes or 4 mile hexes or 1 mile hexes or 2 mile hexes, whatever you want, and to your 1 day turn or 1 week turns, you adjust it. You adjust scale, the time scale and the geography scale. You adjust this to your liking, to your campaign, to your map. And then you use these rule of thumb movement rates, which are detailed enough for any purpose you might want to have. Or you could even plug in those from the player's handbook based on the inches. But once you move in a big group, that really doesn't matter. You just take one of the slowest of the group. So this is the reasoning there. This is sort of a wargame design kit, right? And very important is the sentence, some variation in movement rate is justifiable. What does this mean? This means that if you go to 6 mile hexes, you might just as well assume, okay, maybe then for 6 mile hexes, maybe we just say light people move 36 miles in a day, right? So this really does not change too much. It adjusted to your scale is what he's saying. So this is a wargame design kit, or well, outdoor survival design kit, right? For AD&D. Okay, and if we look For 5-mile hexes, this calculates to 642 leg movement and 128665 cavalry movement. It's mentioned often that the draft horse speed is the actual speed that you want to use for mounted characters. You know, if they're trotting around for several weeks, then they use the speed of a draft horse, and this calculates to 6, and the 6 is just what we had for cavalry in the Napoleonic wargame. So you see these numbers, they're not arbitrary, and you adjust them to make them easily handleable. If we then look at the procedures of the actual first market Hex Crawls, right? I mean, the very first one is that one, is Mission to Mithril. Mission to Mithril has this Hex Crawls 1 to 6 printed on the map, like Outer Survival. So when you communicate with the players, you use these numbers, right? You don't bullshit around with northeast, southwest, all this shit. You tell the numbers, okay, direction 2, direction 3, direction 5, right? That's what you do. Also, you could roll a hex die, and then you would know where they get lost or whatever, or if you get drifted or something, right? I think in the oceans you can be drifted by the winds or something. Okay, so the orbital map is provided, so you don't even have to draw as a player. So you have, like, the total map is given, like in a regular wargame, like in Outer Survival or in Marengo or what, yeah. So then you survey the planet, so you check each of the hexes for special stuff. The other adventure on the backside is Across the Bright Face, and this adds a chase, so you have time pressure. So this is a little bit more complicated, but all done in 1980 with crystal clarity. So this crystal clarity is also found in the procedures. You see, okay, first phase, the DM states, or the referee actually states the hex terrain and gives the description of the hex terrain, right? The players, they listen and they note down what they want. Then the weather is determined. Then they roll for an event. Players react. Then maybe special events, players react. Then preparations. The players say what they want to do, right? If they want to check the whatever, if they do measurements, whatever they want to do. That, you know, the playing, right? This is the interaction structure of how the play is structured. Then time is recorded, and then you go on to the next hex. And this way, you either game out the chase in Across the Bright Face, or you explore this planet. This is what you do. There's no bullshitting around, right? You just play the actual game. So, if you look at the details, Mission to Mithril has some more fixed things. So the hex size is fixed, the turn length is fixed to a day, but a day is a Mithril day and has only 20 hours, 20 Earth hours. So you get a 20-hour day, you get the 700-kilometer hexes, but your transportation is fixed. So you always have the Horonin all-terrain vehicle, which is sort of like a tank or an APC. Imagine something like that. And it has a certain speed. So what you now have is the numbers of hours of hexes. The number of hours a hex traversal costs. This is now your movement cost. So you have 20 hours in a day, and for every day you can, spend these 20 hours on moving across the board. And that's how you do it. Low numbers of hexes per turn. Just as Jim Dunnigan wanted. Okay, for the Isle of Dread, it gets a little bit more mushy. It gets a little bit more, imprecise. Because we are very close to a very important or maybe tragic moment in D&D's history, but we're still on the good side. So we're on the good side, and how does this work? So we have the player map, so the players get that, and here you see an actual copy of the player map after exploring the Isle of Dread to a certain degree. I actually found the Corporal ruins and everything. I don't know, maybe this is not the last version, but it's at least one version, one intermediate version. And this was painted by school children, right? And I played this with school children, so they had no problems doing this. They didn't need any Alexandrian to complicate their game. So this is very easy, and maybe if you're older, you have played it as a kid yourself, it works, right? And how does it work? Well, easy. The transformation happens by actually using the tools in the module. So you use the player map, and you use the instructions, which are, they map one hex of terrain in every direction when they pass through a hex. So that's what the players do. And the player move inland. So they move inland from the starting village, and then they get told by the DM, in this hex, you get this terrain, and this hex you get this terrain. And if you move one further, then you might get up to 7 new hexes. Usually it's just 2 or 3 new hexes, maybe just 1, but some new hexes, right? The question is, how far do we actually move? So if you're naive, you might say, okay, I move 1 hex per turn, if you don't go back to the basic books, or the DM didn't. If you actually looked it up, you get this table. And this table is, while it's not perfect, it is workable, because it's scaled to 6 miles. So everything's multiple of 6. Multiple of 6 means with the hex scale, which is set to 6 miles, then this is easily transferable to a movement factor. So you get, according to the move per turn, you get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hexes a day, right? Depending on what you're doing. So, and I guess many kids stopped. I guess many kids stopped at that point, and which is fine. You can play the module just like this, moving 1, 2, 3, or 4 hexes every day, and then exploring the island this way, making your encounter rolls, and have a grand old time. Or if you looked further, you might have come across this little table in the BX, or in the expert rule book actually, and this makes stuff complicated, because movement is now 2/3 the normal rate. But what do? I move 1 hex in the open. Movement is normal, so I expand. So let's say I've got 3 hexes per day, right? So I move 1 hex, and then I move 1 hex into the woods. Is my movement now over? Okay, maybe it is. 2/3 plus 1/3, maybe this works. But let's say I have 4 movement factors, and I now move 1 in the open, right? So I've got 3 movement factors left, and now I move into the hills, and now I expand 2/3 my normal rate. Oh no, I don't expand 2/3 my normal rate. I move at 2/3 my normal rate. So my normal rate is now 4, or do I move now at 2/3 of the moves per turn and convert this into miles and then hexes? So, I mean, of course there's an answer to that, but you see, by this reasoning, it's getting complicated, especially for children. And if you compare this to wargaming, nobody, not even the Prussians doing Kriegspiel with rulers and protractors and table books, have done this, because this is not how you measure travel, right? This is not how it works. I don't know what kind of people came up with it. Oh, actually, we do know. We will talk about this later. But what you can do, you could charitably read this and simplify it. You know, when you squint at this table, you sort of can read AD&D's movement costs for that. So you could say, okay, clears 1, forest costs 2, mountain costs 3, road is half, and go with that, right? Run with that. You can sort of do this. It works. Okay, if you believe me, or if you're inclined to believe me, then I came up with this little table here, and it lists, it does this version of the game, or does this model have integer movement factors? So small integer, right, from 1 to 10 basically. Are the players hex mapping? Are they either given, interacting, or playing on a hex map, or filling in their own hex map? Do they get hex directions? And how is getting lost handled? Because getting lost is very important in mapping. So to be able to map, you may not be misled by the DM. So if you are misled, or you mustn't be misled by the DM. If the DM is misleading you, meaning that you think you are on the track, but actually you are lost. So if you don't know that you are lost, then mapping becomes basically impossible, especially if you're filling out the hex with crayons or anything other more permanent thing that's very hard to erase. And especially if you're making mapping, exploring in that sense, is obviously a step-by-step process. So I move from one hex to the next, and if I don't know that I lost myself it's nearly impossible to recover. And even if it's possible, it's very, very frustrating. Definitely not for small animals or children, and also not for adults. That's why I think only juvenile people ever would do this to fuck with each other. I don't know why, but so nobody does this, right? This is it's stupid, because the hex map already is an abstraction. So you communicate in the abstraction because nobody's there, right? We don't see the sun, we don't see the landmark, and the only interface that we have is the DM. So the DM is the only interface that we have to the game world. So that's why the abstraction is so powerful. Okay, but this rant aside, so you can see this overview, and we see that things are getting worse from top to bottom, right? And it's also chronologically sorted, and stuff is getting worse from top to bottom. So if we color this, we can see in green all things are good, right? And obviously wargames work just fine, as you see, as you've seen. Auto Survival is also sort of a wargame, but it adds in getting lost. But you get lost, and you roll a die basically on the hex rows, and then you know where you're lost, which means you didn't go where you wanted to, but you now know where you are, and you can either go back or you can just keep on moving. So, and this is what original D&D basically also has, right? So you are lost, but it just means that the turn that you basically said you wanted to take did happen, but you didn't get all the results that you wanted. And this expends resources, this expends time, is frustrating enough, but it does not mess with your mapping. First edition, I mean, AD&D, Advanced D&D, is advanced, so there's a slight possibility that you might not know where you are. It's actually pretty small, I think 1 in 10 chance or something, that you don't know. So usually you know that you're lost, and usually you even know where you end up in which hex on your player map. But there's a certain chance that there might be 2 or 3 hexes where you could have ended up. But as soon as you enter a hex that you've already mapped, the DM is obliged to tell you, so you can now backtrack. So it's advanced, so there's a little bit of chance of, oh, I'm really lost, but it's easily recoverable, right? So there's no still very easy to create a player map. I mean, yeah. So on Mithril, you cannot get lost because it's a sci-fi game in that sense. And now we're getting close to the weird part, right? So Isle of Dread, integer movement factor actually doesn't, because of the 2/3, 3/3, 1/3 movement rate, which is weird. But as we saw, implicitly, the module is written as if it's very clear how many hexes you may move per day, and there's no. It's sort of sounds like a fixed amount, and you can do this. So the player hex map, definite yes, right? So I mean, it's printed on the outside cover. So the player hex map is maybe the most important feature in the Isle of Dread. Hex directions sadly are not there. There's this compass rose this compass that's printed, but it doesn't even match the hex directions. So it has I think 8 directions where the hexes have 6. So it doesn't match up. It's yeah, sad, but it's not forbidden. Getting lost, it's sort of implicitly forbidden to get lost. So that's why I wrote it like I did. If you use the full X rules, you can be misled even. The DM is not supposed to tell you when you're lost. And this obviously would mess with the explicit player hex mapping, so there's a mismatch, right? There's like a discontinuity going on. So for BX, if you look at the expert rule books, we don't have integer movement, as I showed you, but I showed you it's recoverable. So if we squint, we get proper terrain costs, and we get the small integer movement factors if we divide by 6, right? So this works. So is a player hex map assumed? Well, obviously in one way, yes, because the Isle of Dread is packaged with it. But if you look at the actual text of the expert rulebook, it mentions hex maps only as being very nice for miniature warfare or for miniature combat, which is, I don't even know where this sentence came from. Okay, hex directions are explicitly out. If you look at the examples, you get north, south, and these things, no hex rows or whatsoever. Getting lost, as I already said, is yes, and it's so you can get lost, but it's misleading. So if you get lost, you might not know that you are lost, and this will lead to bad mapping and to be even more lost, and this will lead to super frustrating situations that are first not fun, and to destroying the whole point of hex crawling. Okay, so if we then look at the Mensa edition, the table that made the integer movement factor and movement cost recoverable is now destroyed. It's not fully gone, but it's not printed as a table anymore. So the idea to divide by 6 and so on is very hard to recover. Everything else being the same. So in second edition, stuff gets really, really weird and kooky. It really gets super weird. There's so many essays that are just mind-bogglingly complicated or player-hating regarding movement, and there's also 3 movement systems in there. Yeah, player hex mapping basically is impossible because there's the DM doesn't have a fixed hex map anymore. The DM now has this overlay hex map, and this of course changes. Also, it's impossible because of the misleading stuff and so on and so on. So it's really not supposed to be like this. The misleading part on getting lost is just amazingly meanly written and stupidly written. Okay, so hex directions of course not, and Alexandrian has integer movement is beyond repair. So he has with miles are spent, movement points or movement miles are spent within the hex when turning, and he has a long and a short edge, and you can have sub hex movement. This is beyond any repair. Player hex mapping is forbidden, which might be a little bit unfair if you think about that, or unfair to Mark Red, because that's the whole point of the Alexandrian's article, the main conceit, that he wants to hide the hex map from the player. So player shall not and never know in which hex they are, which makes hex crawling also impossible, but he claims what he's doing is hex crawling. But I would disagree, and I think you know where I'm coming from now. The rest is, I think, very obvious. So what we can see here is that we have a weird discontinuity. Like in geology, we have the Moldvay-Cook discontinuity. Here we have the Moldvay-Cook discontinuity, or just we're not calling it the Moho, we're calling it the Moko, right? The Moko. This is the weird discontinuity. How can this happen? I mean, the same box has the Isle of Dread and the expert rule set, and they don't even really work together. So how can this be? A little footnote on second edition. There's some weird way in which there could be an integer movement factor in there, and in the first version of the video I talked about, I don't know, a half an hour about that alone. So just saying, you can believe me, or you can watch the long video. I don't know if I'll upload that, but there we go. Okay, so while we're talking about getting lost in second edition, this is just this super kooky essay that's written by Zock-Bock actually, and I can just urge you to read this to start getting an idea of how crazy this is. You know, it takes so long to get into all the crazy parts, but the most crazy part is the just lost, which invalidates everything all the former games before the Moko have ever written on getting lost, because they say, okay, if you're following a trail, you're safe. If you're following a river, you don't get lost. But with the Mr. Cook, with a Zap, you can get lost. Well, you can get messed over by the DM, because let's say you follow a road, then the DM says, oh, but what the players don't know is that so you're supposed to go right on the next intersection, but there's another intersection that nobody told them, and if they take this, they will be lost. And this is his just lost. I mean, is there a more ass backwards and asinine way to do overland travel than this? I don't know, but yes, there is. It's when you are into hopeless lost territory. If you read the last 3 paragraphs, the players are announcing that they are marching to the west to follow a landmark. So they already did their thing. They followed a landmark, but unknown to them, it curves slightly, the path, right? And the players are so stupid that they don't even realize that they're changing cardinal directions, compass directions. So, yeah, I mean, as I said in the first version of this video, I talked a lot about this text. I will leave you at that. We'll leave it at that. Read for yourself and see how idiotic it is. But especially the last paragraph. Like, one should not even check if characters are lost if they don't have a goal. So the best thing as a player is to stay with don't have a goal. And how he's going to do exploration, there's no chance he ever played an exploration adventure after he read this. It's perfectly possible for characters just to strike out, to see what can be seen. If one has no place to be and no concern about ever getting back, one cannot get lost. I mean, are you shitting me? Does he even know how an exploration module works? How should I fill in my map if you're not telling me where I am? Right? So, I mean, please read this again. I don't want to spend another half an hour on that. Okay. So if you follow me so far, and believe me that Zock-Bock is the writer of what I just showed you, then we could ask ourselves, how can this person that obviously never has run an exploration-based module or proper hex crawl, how can he be credited with writing the Isle of Dread, which is, right, I mean, the hex crawl. I mean, it's the one and only. So if we look at the credits, we actually see that the first edition, the Isle of Dread 1981, lists Tom Moldvay as main designer and has the developer Paul Ritchie III and has an editor and has other people who also edited and able assistants in the form of very famous people who all helped. And if you look at the Mensa version, the red box version, you don't see most people anymore. No developer anymore, although the text is basically the same. And David Cook, good old Zap, just moved to the front. Nice move, Zap. Nice move. Very nice, because I think Tom Moldvay was already out of the company, so you could move to the front and nobody would complain, like you did with the expert set. At least if we want to believe Steve Marsh, your former co-writer or maybe the main writer of the expert set. There's a pattern there. But is there further evidence for this conjecture? Well, if we look at the developer Paul Ritchie III actually is good friends, childhood friend with Errol Otis. And if you look at what Paul Ritchie III later did, well, not too much later, he formed a computer game company widely successful, creating one of the most beloved franchises in sci-fi gaming, Star Control. This is a picture from Star Control 2, maybe the apex of strategy exploration gaming. So he knew his shit in game design, and he could transfer it to other things, like Steve Marsh, right? John Peterson once told Steve Marsh that Steve Marsh is actually the most successful of the old ones, of the great old ones, after leaving TSR. And Paul Ritchie III is maybe not on the schedule of John Peterson, but he also knows his way around. So we got 2 brilliant designers, one for the expert set, and one, but was very young, was just doing a summer internship, hacking the expert set out. Steve Marsh, that is, and you got Paul Ritchie III as developer, helping out Tom Moldvay and all the other guys who are working on the Isle of Dread. And what Dave Cook, Zock-Bock, then somehow claimed authorship, first authorship. Who's that Zap? Well, that Zap earned a BA in English with a theater minor, which will be important soon, in 1977. So he claimed to have played some wargames before graduating, and he was introduced to AD&D and played that, so he liked that better than the wargames, because he could apply more of his theater skills, right? See where this is going. When he ended his studies, he was isolated in Nebraska, was a teacher there, and the only person he could game with was his wife, and he only would play AD&D one-on-one. So this is very different from the heavy amount of wargaming that the Twin Cities or the like Geneva groups did in exactly that time frame. So he quit his teaching job because he hated teaching, and the pupils gave him the name Zeb because he looked, I don't know, some like a Confederate person from some TV show. I'm not totally sure about that. What happened then is that even when he was at TSR, he never played proper D&D. He didn't, enter their gaming circle. Also not with Dave. And I already touched this, as the expert said, in the Isle of Dread, he had collaborators, which he doesn't credit, but they remember him not doing what he claims that he did, but he doesn't really mention them when he's asked about these two things. So that's sort of fishy there. But what we do know, what he actually wrote, is the second edition core books, which I showed you a very small, very short glimpse into. He co-wrote many entries for a variety of game nets, so he's very few single authorships. It's curious about this guy. And he's also of Planescape fame. He also claims to be like the daddy of Planescape, but as you all know, if you a second edition fan or a Planescape fan, then there's many other very talented authors who participated in that. And for those of us first edition guys who hate Planescape, so he can claim that all day he wants, then doesn't make it better for us at least. Anyhow, he has interestingly no wargaming credentials before 1981. So, and if you look at those until 1985, you can check out Board Game Geek. I spare you those slides because this all went too long before in the first version. So you can check out the Board Game Geek site, and you will see a lot of area-based movement games, right? Area movement games, and these are like the red-haired stepchild of the wargaming world. In wargames, you usually have, if you want to be credible, hex and counter wargames, and Zeb didn't do any of those until 1985. And even then only, with somebody else and on somebody else's game system. So he was designing licensed stuff, and the picture you see there is of an area movement game called Greyhawk Wars that is, I think, shunned by both the Greyhawk community as well as the wargaming community. So I actually am one of the people who think there's some value in that thing, but exploration, hex and counter, movement factors, no sir. And if you look at a single author modules, curiously, there's no hex crawling in there. Dwellers of the Forbidden City, for example, no overland travel whatsoever. Just this elaborate sort of city. I mean, this temple district with some set pieces there. But curiously, X5, very curiously, has a long section of overland travel, but he creates instead of doing a hex crawl, what we would expect from somebody who allegedly wrote Isle of Dread, or allegedly wrote the expert rule set that is nowadays the go-to for the hex crawl people. He only has trail roading, right? So you follow the river, go through the swamp, and then you hit the caravan trail. And this is basic trail roading. This is what, all the 90s were doing all the time when they didn't have any hex maps anymore. They hated hex maps, or they didn't even know how to use them, as we now will further understand. Okay, to recommend or to back up some of those claims that I just made, please listen to the Zock-Bock interviews with Steve Marsh and Zeb Cook. Back to back is a very smart move to do, and then you'll find out. It's true what I'm saying. Also, a more corroboration on Steve Marsh's claim. I pretty much wrote the expert set by myself. That's what he said, and he was saying that Cook was just doing the editing, and the different places. Steve Marsh will also go on and say that Zeb Cook was mostly actually doing the physical editing to paste together the whole thing. Okay. So another actor, I think another English major, or maybe it's a theater major and the English minor, trained actor, worked as an actor, but now is mostly a blogger and live streamer, is Justin Alexander, the Alexandrian. He now concentrates more time on the blood, as I said, right? And the way it works supposedly is he writes a certain kind of blog post, and then over 1,000 people give him $1 automatically. So that's, well, good deal, right? Can't knock the hustle. So I haven't found any wargaming pedigree on his site, but didn't dig too deep. But at the obvious places I didn't find anything. But he wrote extensively about what he calls hex crawls. I would say aren't hex crawls. What are the main points? Well, it's miles based, ignoring hexes. So when you're doing miles, when you're doing hexes, you want to transform them to movement factors, as I've showed you, right? With the proper hex gaming. So he's talking about miles all the time, as you see in this table and many other tables. Then he's using these stupid watches. And a watch is not a basic unit for tracking time. That's just not true. A basic unit for tracking time is a second. Or a turn in a game. And the turn needs to be scaled to the hex scale and to the speed of the units. And then you got a game going, right? As we've seen. So a watch is a useless. It's really useless. It's obfuscation. So this is obscurantism to the highest degree. So he adds arbitrary complexity and diagrams to which you don't even need, and he annihilates discrete space and small integers even for the DM. So even if we follow his mission that wants to hide the hex map from the players, at least the DM should use the simplified tools of discretized space. But he's not allowing it, because the DM now has to do angles that are not 60 degrees multiples, but he's doing angles, arbitrary angles in 10 degrees, which is ass backwards and super retarded, because if you have angles different from 60 degrees multiples, you should just use a map and not use any hexes anymore. So he's making it even more complicated for himself, for the DM, which is mind-boggling. And this is, I mean, when I saw this, when I was looking at it, I was so angry that I decided, okay, I need to set the, I need to set things straight. This is against humanity. This is a crime against humanity. If you have a hex map, then this discretized space means that you are not caring for anything below that discretized amount. But this person even calculates the miles in quotation marks that you lose when you change directions in the hex. This is super retarded. Also, he differentiates the different sides, so you can be close to the one to the vertex or close to the edge of the hex. And this is, I mean, I cannot begin to. I mean, at the first version of this video, I was ranting 10 minutes about this, so enough of that. To make a long story short, an effective hex crawl needs the players to map on a hex grid. That's the whole point. Then the DM is telling them what they see when they move along this hex grid. The players then map the newfound hexes, depending on some function. And if you give them the directions, as a pro tip, from 1 to 6 on the hex rows, it's much easier to communicate, because you're doing this often, right? You're doing this maybe 100, 200 times during the evening, or maybe at least several dozen times. And you want to be very clear which hex has which terrain in it. So don't do anything else, but make it very clear which hex you're talking about. And if you include rules for getting lost, they should never interfere with mapping, or if they do, it should be easily corrigable, right? Remember, the hex is not akin to the dungeon room, so that you have to guard and nurture every hex and its contents, and have to play out a whole tavern scene of landscape and whatnot. You just say, you enter the hex, this is the hex, there's some mountains there, and so on. And the picture of the landscape is created by actually interacting with the terrain on this level of abstraction, right? This is what happens. This is the whole idea of hex crawling. Otherwise, I could play directly on a proper map, not the discretized one, right? Okay, so the hex is not the dungeon room, it is the corridor, and you don't measure your position within the corridor. You don't do this. You just move along, and if there's a door, you listen at it, right? And if there's some weird cavern in this hex, something special, you move into negotiation-based, right? Negotiation-based play, just like in the procedure given for Mission on Mithra. Now, could be at an end here, and if you want, you can shut off. But some small footnote to the that goes out to the second edition fans. I claim that second edition doesn't have movement factors. That's actually not quite true. Second edition has 3 different kinds of rule system for movement that are sort of, I guess they're written by different people. I would like to claim that this little table, because it's sort of useful or half useful, was written not by Zock-Bock, but I cannot corroborate that. I only know that Zock-Bock never in any other product used this table, but used his other weird ways of doing things, right? So, I mean, in X5, for example, he never used anything like it. He was using like a fixed 12 miles per day, but then this means that you take, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 days to actually reach the site of the adventure, which is, you know, also mind-boggling, because he has further encounters in X5 that are then that are time dependent. So it doesn't work. I think this person doesn't know anything about scale and space. But okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. So I don't know who wrote this, but this table actually makes sense. So this is a movement factor cost, and you have movement factors as much as miles as you can use. What you can see is that we're sort of leaving this easily deductible small integer range, where, you know, out of this 2 or 3 range that the movement costs usually are, and the movement factors that you have per day are actually pretty large, like 24, right? So these are larger numbers, but you could rescale them to hex sizes of, I don't know, 6 miles. So you could divide this, and this would start working. But if you actually look at second edition products and actual second edition playstyle, then you know that players were not allowed to move on a hex map, right? That just didn't happen. And one example is here, how ass backwards they were. This is like this is a German version of the second edition Forgotten Realms book, but I think you will get the drift. And you get on the upper right side, you get the same terrain costs repeated. So this is like the same table. And then instead of just saying who gets how many movement points and at which time scale and spatial scale this works, they do the opposite. They don't tell you how much movement points you have. They tell you how much time do you need for this kind of terrain at a certain kind of movement factor, but the OG movement factor, not the hex-based movement factor, right? So this is super backwards. This is inverting all gains that are potential in having the terrain costs. This is destroying it. And if you look at the example down there, that sort of looks scientific and looks nice, it's retarded because it does not make use of, you know, as I showed you, move 1 hex, pay the cost, move further, and once you have no movement factors, you stop your turn. No, they calculate the whole voyage and then backtrack how many days this will take. Right? This is, even though they have all the tools that would make it useful, they invert the tools, make them more complicated, make blown up tables that nobody would ever use such thing in a wargame. This is retarded. This is really only, I don't know. Yeah, I'm not saying the things that I want to say right now, but this is really not smart and not done by anybody who ever wanted to actually solve spatial problems. Okay, so, and to make matters worse, the actual example includes cheese smugglers. So you got a band of cheese smugglers that are going over the river, and so on and so on. It's just ridiculously bad, as if they are flipping the bird, right? Flipping the bird to the readers. But I fear they are not. I fear they're serious. And you can go through many second edition era products, and you will see that these movement factors, they exist, but they are not mentally able to use them the way they're supposed to. Or maybe they're supposed to be used in a stupid way. Like here, this is from the Mystara box. You see, okay, Light Forest, wonderful. Light Forest costs 2 movement points. If there was a full stop, this would be golden. But no, they can't do a full stop, because those people, or maybe the Moko, confused them so much that they can't get out of the confusion of the Moko. So instead of Light Forest costs 2 movement points full stop, they say it costs 2 movement points per mile to cross, such that an individual movement factor 12 will move 12 miles per day. And this is, I mean, it's sort of true. I mean, it's obviously true, numbers wise, but it doesn't say anything anymore, because I want to know how many hexes in one turn, and tell me, you can later tell me how much a turn is and how many miles a hex is. This is different from actually interfacing with the game. Okay, thanks for bearing with me. This is the shortest version that I could make right now. Goodbye. And don't let actors get and English majors get in your maps.